Hi everybody, this is Satara and Amber, and this is our show Esoterics today. As promised, this is December 21st, the winter solstice, and we are thrilled to make this our virgin voyage with each other and with you. We're really excited to have you. We're going to be covering all kinds of topics this year and over time to come with a lot of guests. And we're certainly going to be happy to take recommendations from you all for guests because so many of you have run into some really fantastically talented people. But let me introduce my divine and talented and just really lovely co-host, Satara Lightbringer. Satara, how are you today?
I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and I'm really pleased that you and I, who are really artists, I have to say, have figured out a way how to get on here with each other. I'm in the US, you're in the UK, and we're figuring out how to have a conversation like this together and record it and to make a show of it. And I'm pretty thrilled that we figured out some of these mechanics to be able to get this done.
Yeah, very much so, because technology here is still very, very basic, and that basic that we can't necessarily wrap our minds around it.
You know, you make a really good point, and I think we'll be talking about this more to come. But I certainly have a sensibility of myself that is from the future, and I find this realm incredibly frustrating and at times incredibly boring because of how slow things move, including technology.
Yeah, very much so. Technology is probably my biggest bugbear here because, again, I am aware of this is my third time back in this timeline, so I'm aware of far more advanced technology than we're even dreaming of in this particular realm at the moment. So to have to actually press a button to get something, I find quite testing.
Oh my gosh! And if you guys could just who are listening could have listened in a little earlier before we recorded this conversation to Satara and I both alternately cursing and giggling at just the mechanics of getting this conversation going with the technology that we have. I think you'd be in stitches just hearing how we had to carry on with it. But thank you for joining me, and thank you so much for your willingness to have these conversations together, Satara. It's been a long hope of mine and journey to find sort of a partner in crime who could just have almost coffee chats, tea talks.
Yeah, very, very much so, because it's like the way we've been spaced about on the planet, we have got considerable distance between all of us that are singing from the same hymn sheet. And that is deliberate, which is fine because we're holding a certain presence across the whole grid. But that's all very well when we think, oh yeah, that's a good idea. And then we get the human suit and then go, oh, that wasn't so good an idea. How do we get around this?
Well, it's really true because there's a huge level of psychological isolation because of the framework of the human being and our nervous system, and the way our ego is structured. Just our psychological well-being is structured in this dimension. The isolation across the grid. We understand why we're planted like this, so to speak. And we'll talk more about that too, I think, as time goes by. We'll share more around that. But I think what all of us, you hear that phrase, the way of the mystic is lonely.
Yes, the solitary path.
The solitary path. And I think it relates to just what you're saying about the purposeful placement of us across the Indira's net or the grid and why that is. So that's why it's such a pleasure to fumble around with the technology such as it is and figure out how to connect and be connected to one another. And that also has a story for another time as to why that's happening and why we're able to fumble around and find each other now.
Yeah, very much so, because we've gone a long, long time without that. There's a lot of negative talk about the way that the internet has affected 3D life and human life here. But on the flip side, how many people have now been able to connect across the globe that needed to, for multifaceted reasons? It's just made it just flow with ease and grace now. So there's the flip side of the AI on the planet as well.
Right. Well, the reclaiming it and harnessing it for its more appropriate or more or how should I say, the more love-based service, for kind of taking it back from that synthetic environment that it's been used to be heavily programming of us and keeping us from our true natures, I guess, is a good one.
Yeah, very much so. Harmony versus disharmony.
That's it. Harmony versus disharmony. So you guys can already see out there listening that Satara and I are well situated to talk to each other and to you really about a whole wide range of topics. Satara, I'd like to sort of introduce to both of us in this conversation and to our listeners the kinds of things that they can expect for us to be getting into with each other.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and then the things that we'll be inviting, these will all have, these are very likely to also have guests for whom these components of these conversations or pieces are particularly relevant, areas of work that individuals are doing currently in them. But here begins sort of the series of dialogues that you'll hear Satara and I have across time. Satara, the first one that comes to mind here, that came to mind for me, is what we are really talking about when we hear the words evolution in human consciousness, ascension in consciousness, 0 point. Helping people understand what those terms are generally referring to. And so when you hear that from me, what is it you generally observe those to be about?
I just kind of put all of that into one box, I suppose, really, because I look at how the greater consciousness works, and the fact that every thought form has already been programmed within the greater consciousness, and it is like a level of grids. So it's literally, when I think of like 0 point in ascension, it's just the fact that we've gone up some levels on the grids and we're rising up to the next plethora of levels within the grids. So if you liken it to Jacob's ladder, for instance, we're just quietly moving our way up each run of the ladder, and we're hitting the next levels of the consciousness that we are able to have full access to.
In the human kingdom.
Yeah, very much so.
And I think what comes to my mind as well, Satara, is that this is the first time in human evolution that humanity on Earth has been able to, in the modern human, I should say,
yes,
has been able to access this turn as a species.
Yeah, very, very much so. It's something that at the time of the end of the age that we know of as Atlantis, we kind of spiraled down hugely within the greater consciousness and had to almost start from scratch again. So the likes of Sumeria and Egypt and into like Mayan and Aztec, all the early civilizations that we think of, were really starting from scratch with a few memories that were kind of glitching through for what was possible.
For what was possible. And we'll talk more, you guys listening to us as we go, about what I observe, Satara, as a cycle, because all cosmology has a cycle. The multiverses, yes, and the galaxies all have a life cycle.
Yeah.
Which is an evolution and an involution, an ascension and descension, if you will. So we'll be talking about all of that and where we are in that right now, which gets to 0 point.
Yes.
so forth and so on. So that, you guys, is one of the topics that I know Satara and I will be talking about with each other. And okay, here's another one. So what we're talking about when we talk about New Earth, fifth dimensional living, going quantum. So for you, Satara, when you hear me throwing those words and phrases out that are ubiquitous among our tribe, what comes to mind there?
Certainly from like a new earth sort of perspective, as far as my awareness goes, we already have it and it's never not existed. Everything exists throughout the different dimensional realities that we have in this realm. So it's a case of what we've climbed up the ladder to reach. So different people will be experiencing different dimensional realities here every day, and they will be moving up from even 2D through to perhaps 8D at the moment, depending on what they're experiencing. So it's quite a large curve that people are going through, which is interesting from a human perspective, to be able to keep what we think of as level-headed within that roller coaster ride that we go on. Because it's like 1 minute we're talking quantum physics and the next we're vacuuming.
That's me. That's my life.
Yeah, and mine. So it's to be able to sort of hold that and be able to work within that frequency can be very kind of testing to light workers, especially people who are just kind of waking up and starting to realize a bigger picture than they saw the day before.
You know what?
It's really challenging.
That is super challenging, and what I think about, and I'm hoping that this show is about for us and our tribe and the people who come to listen, is this will feel like home. That they'll, just like you, just like me, we know we have meals to cook, children to raise, pets to feed, cat boxes to clean, cups of coffee to drink, crystals to engage with, and flashes of downloads to contend with. Every esoteric theme going on, bumped right up against the human doing and human living, earning money, going to work, dealing with bosses, dealing with coworkers. I'm hoping that this will be a place where we can juggle the themes of well-being and balance that you just spoke to.
Yeah, very, very much so. I think it's something that needs to be more openly spoken about, because at the moment there seems to almost be a them and us thing that go on the planet. The I know everything people, and the people that go, well, I don't really know at the moment what's right from wrong because I'm still fumbling about a bit here. And to let people know that there's no right from wrong. Nothing's wrong, because everything is a step to the soul's evolution and balance. So therefore there's no problem with what anybody's ever doing.
Well, and I think eventually we'll be talking about the linearity in which we have to use words in a human nervous system, the duality with which we have to, it's not this, it's that. That's good, this is bad, that's true, that's untrue, this is light, this is not light. I think that one of the beauties of these conversations is being able to hold all that is, that all is light, that love is light, that there isn't anything other than light, that there isn't anything other than love, that it's all,
Yeah, very much so. Every part of the spectrum is part of the spectrum. There's no separation.
Right.
So therefore, it's how can you start to separate things out when ultimately there is only one energy?
And that's the human, but that's the human.
It's the human psyche.
Yeah, that gets involved with that, and knowing when your human psyche is, and knowing the difference, and then it just takes a lot of practice, and it takes daily and ongoing in the day practice, and catching those thought forms and catching those emotions, and holding a higher mind over all of that. But we'll be talking a lot about that. Something else that comes in my mind when we were planning this conversation with each other for me was also what's meant by new humans, DNA upgrades, light codes, the role of photonic light, solar activity, and its impact on us. Because everybody who's going to come to this call is going to know something about everything that we're going to talk about today, including these.
Yeah, of course.
So what comes up around those themes for you?
I kind of look at all of those as the way I work with them, because part of my role is to work with activating people to new levels. So I do that in a holographic way, with the awareness that this whole reality is a holographic reality. Therefore, all that exists within the holographic reality are the blueprints that we need to work with. So I will look at someone and I will see them as a holograph. I will see where the circuit boards aren't necessarily joined up. I will see what's missing from the circuit board, what chips need to be added in, what needs to be taken away because they're perhaps been upgraded. So very much like a computer program. So if you think of everyone and everything as a computer program, when it's had the latest update, if we've not updated it, it's no longer going to run after a while. So this is how I kind of broad spectrum the whole of that, because each one relates to that in a slightly different way.
Oh, absolutely. And I think for me, and you and I share, it's interesting because guys, as you're listening to Satara and I talk, realize also that Satara and I are also getting to know each other with these conversations and know where we cross over and where we diverge in our narratives. And it's always so interesting, Satara, to, in these conversations with you, to notice where all on our own, out in our world, we've come to some understandings and similar, shall I use the human word, conclusions. I very much also understand the holographic nature of the game of life. And I'll put the word game in there now. And I mean that with the highest honor of the word.
I refer to it as a game as well, because it is almost like we've decided to go into this virtual reality to see what we can test, what we can play with, knowing that we can't harm anything because nothing is really real.
Right, that it's all, I'm holding the frequency of the matter from the antimatter that I transited through the 0 point between the two, so to speak, and I'm holding the matter in place for my own experimentation, exploration, and curiosity, and for my karmic patterning that I brought this time into this lifetime. Now, you and I talk like this over tea and coffee.
Yeah, of course.
But I realize I just said a mouthful. I realize that you just said a mouthful.
Yeah, but it's the whole way it works, isn't it? We've decided to go for this. So, when we talk about people manifesting their own reality, they're doing so from the macro to the micro. And everything in between that. So there's no holds barred here. This is why you get all of the different role players, and they'll play a role until they've really finished playing that part of the game. And then they go, great, I can move on to the next level of the game now. What do I want to play with next? And we just re-evaluate that, and we become a different person because of it, because we've got a whole new set of parameters really that we've created for ourselves to throw ourselves into and see how we get on with it.
And it has implications, practical applications and implications. Say, when I take a look at my relationships, my friendships, my love relationships, I look at them my lens on that is so different as I've increasingly awakened to the consciousness story. I now clearly see them as me, an aspect of me, usually front-loaded with karmic patterning from other lifetimes. that were knitted together in the angelics part of self, fractal of self, for this lifetime, and something that's usually unfinished, or that is a pattern that I am in the earth school working out. And that helps me not react and rebuff so hard or defend. It's sort of, okay, this is me, that's me, and I'm going to watch my thought forms, my emotional forms. I'm going to play this out to see how far I can heal that item, or I can release and transmute this item that I'm seeing in my husband, that I'm seeing in my child, that I'm seeing, because that's me, an aspect of me. And I think once you get, isn't this the basis of sovereign living?
Very much so, you know, and knowing that everything that you're encountering is just another little aspect of you that you need to kind of look at. And you think, wow, okay, someone's just shown me a hell of a mirror. Not sure I like what's in that mirror. So, okay, how do we work out where this is coming from? How deep is this sitting? Where have I bought it from to be able to deal with it?
But I think it takes major cosmic balls, quite frankly, to be willing to pony up and go. And I think this is where the human problem comes in of, if it doesn't bring me pleasure, I want to avoid it.
Yeah.
Because what we'll then do is we will remove the stimuli that's causing us distress, thinking that if the stimuli is gone, the externalized item is gone, then I won't have the distress. And then, motherfucker, what happens
is it comes back round.
Dude, and I don't know about you, but when it comes back around, I'm still and I'm sorry for all my cursing, people, but I'm still the same old asshole I was, not catching on that this is something I'm to really get in the game on and sort out my humanity and soul self around.
And how many people do we know that are constantly in that repeating circle? And trust me, I'm including myself in this at times. I'm not, you know, saying I'm above this by any stretch of the imagination, because we all have these circles, but we go round and round on this merry-go-round until suddenly we realise what we've got to do to get off that merry-go-round. and sometimes it can be such a small thing.
Yeah, but
you just think, wow, so just for the sake of being grateful for an hour a day, I've just got off that merry-go-round, and damn me, that other one's backed away. How fantastic. Why didn't I grasp that 10 years ago?
Okay, you brought up a word, grateful, and there's forgiveness, grace. We're going to talk later, I think in the year too, about vibratory states of being and resonances, the quantum mechanics of words and emotional states and mental constructs and forms. Totally,
because you think when we're in that zone, when it's coming at us from all angles, all we want it to do is go away.
Oh, yeah.
So all we want to do is be ungrateful, a little bit naffed off at the whole fact that it's coming to us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
And we just want it to go, and we'll do anything we can do to get out of that situation.
It's an
we will
condition.
Get rid of people out of our lives like a deck of cards. They will be falling here, there and everywhere away from us, because all we're doing is scrambling to get away from it, when actually we should be doing the opposite. We should be going, okay, just throw it all at me. Let me work out what the pattern is. Fantastic, I've got the pattern now. Great, I know what the opposite to that pattern is.
Okay, but that would require the human being to be incredibly self-responsible.
Yes.
That would require the human being to eschew victimhood.
Yes.
And we're going to talk a lot more about that in the coming year too, Satara, about that, the dynamics, the consciousness dynamics about sovereignty as it relates to eschewing victimhood and taking self-responsibility, because we're going to be talking a lot about well-being of our kind.
Yes, very much so, because if we're not in the right zone, we're no good, not only to ourselves and our own growth, but all of those around us that are mirroring back to us.
Right. So it's really going to, this is going to be an interesting part of the conversation. So the next thing that came to mind, and what you guys are going to find out from, at least from my end of things, is I make lists, and I have these things I want to be sure I'm mentioning, and I've got Satara here is absolutely swinging at everything I bring up because she's just that good.
And I'm kind of the opposite, because I just think that's fine. Whatever comes, we'll deal with it. Whatever seems to be the right thing to talk about, we'll just talk about it. I've got no list. I haven't. The only thing I got on my notepad is today's date.
And she means that because I've seen her hold her pad up to prove these things to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm like, okay, it'll be what it will be.
It'll be what it's going to be. So I think part of this also, Satara, for me is I feel like rushing the gate. I have been holding this kind of content in my energy, in my awareness for so long, and I've been holding it alone. Over here on my part of the grid, certainly I have students with whom they bring their personal conditions and we work through things together, but I never have anyone with whom I talk so robustly who has the fullness of recognizing what I'm talking about. In other words, I haven't had this kind of a peer to really suss this stuff out with, and I think I just have that feeling of like a tidal wave of things I want to hear back from you about. And I know that the listeners who are here are just starved for the same. I know they are. So
yeah.
So I think that's where that
and back to the very nature of we've been on our own for so long.
Yeah.
And it takes us time to reconnect with people who are so close to us family wise, across the whole of the spectrum of this earth.
Oh yeah, and beyond.
And how many of us have sat there at some point in our lives, pretty much in tears or close to it, thinking, why me? Because you can't see anybody else or hear anybody else that is having any sort of similar experience. And the world's looking at you as if to say, wow, you're the weird one. And actually you're looking back at them and going, well, actually, I'm the sane one.
It's really bewildering. And
yeah.
I think depending on which of your bodies has the upper hand, so to speak, in your current blueprint. For me, and I can tell for you too, your mental body is around will and desire is super strong, Satara. I am too. And because of that, that's how it can be that we're here doing this, because it takes an enormous amount of will and desire and drive for this to be part of your mission. Otherwise, I think if our strength was primarily in the emotional body of consciousness, this world can chew you up and spit you out.
Oh yeah, repeatedly. And I think part of it as well is as you kind of spend more time within this realm and you really do the deep work on yourself and with yourself, that you start to really understand how you are, how you tick and who you are. And as soon as you realize who you are and how you function, it takes a great deal of firepower to shoot you down. Yeah, because you're already like, well, I know who I am, I understand how I work, I only ever come from like love and compassion with people. So if that's not what someone is getting from that, that isn't about me.
Well, and I think it takes enormous courage to stand in the face of the onslaught of the firing squad of the content that's here on our planet. And there are just those of us, and I really do put you and I in a category of forerunners. I think we are sort of a middle. There are some later ones and certainly some earlier ones having been on this planet of forerunners that we came to hold these emanations at the time on the planet. I feel super sorry sometimes for those who went even before. And you know what, Satara? I've said this often. I completely understand the addict, the artist, the pattern around suicide and death that has really, it's like the canaries in the coal mine. I will say often, but for the grace of God go I, that my brothers and that I live and work in honor also of my brothers and sisters for whom they could not thread the eye of this needle.
Yeah, very much so. You know, we're very lucky to be on the timeline that we're on now compared to others that we've experienced here, and the amount of persecution that has been for any that have remotely stuck their head over the parapet to be able to go, well, actually, this is the bigger picture that I see, and if you could see it too, you would see things differently.
And I agree with you, and I have been on this timeline many times to know, and been that, and many of us have been who are going to come here. We're recognizing our fractal selves. We're having return of what we're calling memories of past lives and future lives and so forth, because we have to talk about it in a linear way. But of course, for me, and I think for you all, is now.
Yes, very much so.
And there's a quantum mechanical story around that. We're going to be getting into those things too, I think. I do want to shift into this next subject that we'll be talking about as time goes by. And for those of you listening, my sister Satara is one of the most informed and experienced beings I've had the pleasure of spending time with. We have some others around us in our midst, and some of you know them too. But we're going to be talking about what's going on with this galactic awareness that folks are broadly waking up to in our collective. We're going to be talking about the Pleiadians, the Sirians, the Venusians, the Arcturians, our identifications with them, and why. And why now? And thousands more, Satara. How many star beings are there?
Yeah, without number, let's face it, there's not a human number that can even kind of go there, is there really? You know, when you look at all the different master races that came forward to create this holographic reality for the human, you know, there's 12 without even batting an eyelid, you know, and you just think, right, so all of those then went off and hybridized across creation. Yeah, it doesn't bear thinking about the different, you know, makeup now that exists across creation is just incredible. But it's just beautiful to know that actually we are each one of them. You know, we have had this experience as each one of them.
Yeah.
So when people identify with, I don't know, Pleiadian, for instance, you know, they also need to realize they need to identify with, like, the Zeta Reticuli. You know, because we're all everything. There's no holds barred, and we're everything because we need to experience every reality and every facet of that reality, because this is what we decided to do, because ultimately we got a bit bored, so we created this. Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, bored today, what should we do? Oh yeah, we'll have a go at that. And it sounded really, really good on paper.
And it was on paper, so to speak. And honestly, I think too, so many people that are going to check in on this conversation with us and our conversations across time, they're going to want to hear about various species. They're going to want to hear us talking about our understandings around genetic experimentation. And for those of you listening, please understand that genetic experimentation goes on all the time. We're going to be talking about hybridization and about AI, and honestly what's going on temporally with what recently happened in China with the scientist who went quote unquote rogue and did the gene alteration on the twin girls, I think, so one of them would not have HIV. I mean, you have to know that I guess people who are going to be listening to this will really already have a bead on that.
Yeah, I would have thought so, because let's face it, this planet, we go back to Atlantean times when we first started to mess about with genes on this planet. So there's 260,000 years ago. So how much more back catalogue do we necessarily need in this reality? And really, we're in new reality.
And how do we think we got here to begin with, people?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God! And this is okay. What you were talking about a little while ago of like, oh my God, one of the deep boredoms and deep like slap my head on the table and groan moments in life is just, oh my God. How is it that we haven't always talked about star systems and other beings? How is it that we could be this ignorant? How is it? I remember as a young person, much younger, going, but of course. And how is it? And that was before I awoke, maybe by between the 2012 trigger and then the 2016 triggers, to my more galactic self and fractals and so forth. Up until then, I really didn't have that much interest. I couldn't even tell you the seven planets, or how many, 9 planets of our own solar system. I was just, picking blades of grass and looking at them closely, turning rocks over. I had no other, but it was after about that time that the architecture, the scaffolding, just loaded on me like
it just changed.
It
just changed. The way the convergences have been going has just been huge. I think that's a good way of kind of putting it. I mean, the basic structure changed in 1957, which was like 12 years before I came back into this reality. That was the main kind of new framework to be able to really kick the evolution within the greater consciousness forward. And you think how long ago that was now?
57.
We're talking 50 years ago now.
Satara, would you say that then that 57 kick up spawned what then went on in the cultural revolution of the 60s, particularly in the States, in the US, and in the...
Yeah, it's certainly, I mean, everything suddenly went on to take a bit of a chill pill, didn't it, in the 60s?
It did.
Yeah, and that was the first time that as a species that there was food for most of the planet. That people could actually take time out and actually enjoy free time from work and daily toil without having to be nose to the grindstone to be able to eat.
Are you talking about the effects of the Industrial Revolution?
I'm talking about the general effects of everything that kind of went up to that point, because if you think that World War II might have finished in 1945, rations were still happening in the 50s.
Yeah.
So there was still very much the lack consciousness being peddled around the globe. Everybody felt that they never had enough because they never were given enough. So that was very much a consciousness that was hammered home to everybody. For that to suddenly start to lift in 1957, with the way that the convergence happened with the different layers of the greater consciousness being amended, because I think that's the best way of saying what a convergence does. And new templates just being put in and gone, okay, you're running with a bit of this now, and it kind of leaks in to what we're dealing with and changes the whole perspective of the planet.
And where, just for our listeners and just for my curiosity too, your viewpoint on in a convergence like that, say in 57, where is this a good question? Where in the multiverse or the cosmologic framework or dimensional framework, where was the biggest change in that harmonic, that template? Where did it occur?
To me, when I kind of look into it, I see a different level of accitonal realignment. Which is basically the way that the mainframe grids out. So if you think that the Earth has its own mainframe,
Yep.
then the second section of that links to the solar system.
Yep.
Then it goes slightly outside of the solar system
Yep.
because it starts to hold a bigger space as it's starting to link into more sectors. Sectors of the universe.
Did it affect was that a point that affected the vibratories, the spin of the planet, or the wobble on the axis?
Yes, it would have. It would have altered the ratio almost of how we're moving.
Okay,
the whole spiral slightly changed.
Slightly changed. The toroidal field.
Yeah.
Okay. Because folks, you're gonna hear from us over time, and Satara, thanks for bearing with me while I kind of turn out to the audience a second here. You're gonna hear us talking about those parts of the mechanics too, and referencing those to things that you already know about, like harmonic convergences and concordances, and we're just going to learn a lot more, I think, over time about those things together and be more conversant about them. But Satara, that for you in 57 was when you came back in?
No, I didn't actually come back till 69. So this is 12 years before I came back in here. I was aware of it from elsewhere, I think is a good way of putting it.
Yeah, sure. That's
yeah,
right.
I was in a totally different role at that time, so I was aware of it from not so much the human standpoint. But yeah, it was huge because that ripple kind of went out across the universe.
Yeah. And by the way, when a ripple goes out across a universe, when we know there's the multiverse, it
can't not have a knock-on effect.
Right, is that a targeted shift specific to a component, or does that shift all that is? Is that a shift across all?
It depends on the way the shift has actually been put forward. The way the 1957 one was put forward, that was pretty much being acted out in other places anyhow. We were kind of a bit slow to get on that particular train here. Okay. So we were really playing catch up. So yeah, it was just really bringing us more in line with other realities that had already moved to that point.
Right. So what you see here as you're listening to the show is you're going to find us also exploring the extraplanetary life, or like what I like to say off-planet activities and realms and beings and influences as we go. So as we're rounding into, I think we're doing well with our time here. There are a few more things that kind of came up for me, Satara, in my thinking. I think we'll be talking about why humans are going beyond classical spirituality themes and now beginning to grasp more about esoterics and mechanics of consciousness. Because what I'm aware of as a teacher, I didn't emerge, I've never been, certainly I was a student all my life of sort of spirituality themes and practices and well-being practices, and I've been a psychotherapist since 1996. So of course, helping people feel well and be well in their lives, and sort of using the awareness principles, quietly using some of my psychic capabilities and empathic capabilities, etc. But now, emerging as a teacher myself, I'm not working around those principles as much as I am what I would call quantum mechanical understanding, for helping people in their daily lives understand how to manipulate their present.
Yeah, it has kind of just completely changed track, hasn't it? If we even wind back 10 years ago, people were still very structured with what they were dealing with. They would have particular books they would go to, particular teachers and gurus they would go to. Very few were willing to actually burn the books, walk away, and actually go, I'm going to sit on my own and I'm going to work it out. And that's what's happening now. People have moved into that different layer within the structuring here to be able to go, actually, I realize it's all about me.
Well, you bring up a good point. I find myself repeating across these recent years, the time of the guru is past.
Yeah.
As our vibratory resonance or wave, the wavelength or particulate has begun to spin or move faster, and science has clearly measured the spin of the planet being faster relative to megahertz. Anybody can look that up. So also has spun off or spun out antiquated thought forms and emotional constructs, psychological constructs that the human species no longer needs. And I think the guru is a good example that you're describing there.
Yeah.
And I think
yeah, very much so. You know, you wind back, let's go to the 60s, before either of us were here, really. You know, how many people travelled across the world because they had to be with a particular teacher?
Oh my God, it was a thing.
It was a huge thing.
The Beatles were into it, remember?
Yeah.
The Beatles had a guru.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly how my mind was working. I remember the Beatles going particularly. But yeah, and you just think this was the thing to do. It wasn't, let's just sit quietly in my room and let's just spend time with getting to know who I am and how I tick, and you know, and see if I'm ticking how I want to be ticking, or if I'm ticking the way I've been brought up or programmed to be ticking.
I think that's the synthetic matrix at its finest that wrapped around the planet, because it made you, what is the best way for a human species to stay somewhat enslaved? It is to artificially suggest to them and maintain the artificial suggestion that they are not creators, that they are not a part of a whole, that their imaginations are for shit, just frivolous for making cut and paste and making, I don't know, pretty pictures.
Yeah, totally.
What a good way to
the whole
people.
disempowerment of the human species.
Yeah, I think it was, listen, elegant design. I hope I'm a part of that. I hope I was a part of that horrible machination. Of course I was. Of course. We all were.
We all were.
Yeah.
We all at some point thought it was a really good idea.
Because there are things that we wanted from that. Or
yes, of course. There is great learning within that. You know, because it's like, you know yourself, if you've not dug a hole for yourself and buried yourself in it, how do you know what it feels like and how to get out?
Oh, absolutely. It's, you know, again, it is owning what you all heard me, and what Satara is talking about is owning the whole. If we look at the line of consciousness if we look at it in a linear standpoint, which you can certainly read a lot about this, from the point of being uncivilized to civilized to develop, I use this construct a lot, to developing, to humanistic, to enlightened, we've been all of them a lot of times.
Yeah,
we've
totally.
been every bit of it, and that means, of course, also the karmic patterning that we picked up along the way. Hello. Another couple pieces that come to mind, Satara, is just basically something we mentioned a moment ago. You know, where do humans come from? The many narratives about what is the genesis of human beings.
Yeah, something I have written on a lot in the past, and I should perhaps revive some of those writings again. I was fascinated going back probably 20, 25 years sort of period ago with what made a human. Because I would walk down the street and I'd look at people. I'm a people watcher. So I would kind of see these different people coming towards me, and I was noticing certain patterns within the stereotypes within them. And I was like, okay, so what is that linking to? And I started to work on how the genetics started to come forward from what races across the universe, which we would class as master races here, to be able to see the traits coming in. I had a particular thing at the time with the Alpha Draconis, which of course have got a terrible reputation at the moment. Everybody's like, oh no, they're such an awful race. You think, well, no, they're just one-track minded race. They have tunnel vision, they decide what they want, and nothing stops them getting it. Well, actually, you can see a lot of our politicians have exactly that trait. You know, they've gone exactly there because that's the mindset you need for that role to play on the planet. So therefore, that DNA aspect is stronger within some people who've got that total bloody mindedness that they're going for it. And I think that's brilliant, and we've all got it.
It is brilliant, and girl, I just love you, Satara, because I was sitting here thinking, and I want to tell Satara that I now, since the last few years, I can watch, you know, I'll watch people move along around me and I'll say, oh, that's very Pleiadian. Ooh, yeah. Very Syrian. I told a guy, I was at a festival out in the mountains this summer, and a really beautiful young man was sitting down next to me in our little goddess tent, and he was just listening to the conversation, and I turned to him, I said, I have the biggest, strongest impulse to tell you how much you look like the Syrian race. I could not. Beautiful and handsome in a very specific way.
Yes.
That's very the high forehead, the strong brow, the serious face, and he looked at me and he just accepted it. You know, he's from Yogaville, he could take it, but I cannot tell you. I can see people that'll say, my goodness, it's so Arcturian, that literally I will see it.
Yeah, you can see it shining out through their DNA. You can see what main embodiment that they're still having within that DNA. And it's great. I think it's hilarious because I'm walking down and I think, oh yeah, look, they're moving everybody out the way. Ah, right, yeah, I see. Reptilian. Yeah, and you just carry on going, and I just think it's funny because I just love the fact that we're still bringing that here, because that's what we need to work on still as a race, but also bring it into the human reality to play with it here too.
And I think that you're going to be invaluable in this conversation as we go forward, and we'll have some guests to speak to us too, because there's an awful lot of racism. Let's racism
throughout the races,
star races, and I know I've got people groaning and chuckling out there, but there's a lot of bias and bad attitudes and fear-based thinking and feeling, and that's for good reason. I mean, I think there are a lot of things that have gone on, that do go on, that make people groan or feel frightened or feel, or feel uncertain. And I think that we'll be talking about things like that over time too.
Yeah, very much so, because it's like, just think of things like the Orion Wars. That's enough to trigger half of like anybody that's awake. And you just think, but on the flip side, not only would you have gone in there to battle against what was perceived as darkness, hell, you were the darkness battling against the light that was trying to stop you. So, like, what side of the coin do you want to look at?
And that
do you want to be heads? Do you want to be tails? Or actually, do you want to look at it from a side view and realise there's three sides to a coin, and actually back up from both and go, oh yeah, look, I did both. Oh yeah, really?
Okay.
And that's huge.
That it is huge that you and I, over coffee and tea chat, we just understand this and are able to speak to it. And I think that that's sort of the service of this kind of podcast time together, because we have brothers and sisters who are going to be listening in on this, who are going to get triggered around, you just said the Orion Wars, and we just a component of who was listening went, oh my God. And we say reptilian, and I just hear a groan or two. And so I can...
But, what people have to realise is, the same with every race, and we play it out here as a race, 10% of every race is an absolute nightmare to the other 90% who are playing ball beautifully. Yeah, and that's the way it goes.
And that is the way it goes.
We realise that as a human, realise it as every other species. There's always going to be some that will push every last boundary that they can within that suit they've been given for that encounter, because that's the role they're playing.
And there are... I am also prone to remind us that our beautiful divine planet Earth and beloved Gaia therein, this is a gem, a jewel. This is a place of riches and marvelous constructs that mean a lot to the rest of the multiverse, that mean a lot to other star systems.
Yes.
So we'll be talking that through too. I feel as we're coming around to maybe our last about 7 minutes together, I'm just going to sort of call out some of this other stuff that we'll talk about, and then Sitara, I think I'll let you kind of close us up until the next time afterward. Some other narratives to our listeners that I think they'll be hearing about with us is we'll be talking about the function of what we would consider Earth School. And maybe even we'll talk some about mystery schools, because that's always something I love to hear and talk about. Hologram. What are we talking about when Sitara and I talk about the holographic existence? The computer approach, the way of viewing the narrative as us as a computer, and the computer systems. Matrix. You heard me mention false matrix. We talked about the grid. We want to get a little more deeply into that, Sitara. And the last things that I thought of, but gosh, this is not an exhaustive list. Remember, I've been holding this in my heart for so long. The basics of energetics. The human energetics, 5 consciousness of human bodies and their function, from the monad or source to the causal, to the mental, all the bodies, emotional and physical, and their, what their intelligences are, and their atomic particulate nature, using the 49 planes of and the atoms associated. I think those are great conversations and guests to have. And then the cosmological basics of energetics. Again, the atomic, the molecular, sound waves, particulate. I cannot forget that what we're also having, like myself, the awakening of sacred geometry and quantum energy, quantum mechanical understanding that comes on us in a flash. I am no mathematician. I'm just a girl from a farm in the country of the U.S., digging in the red clay, and all of a sudden it's been like, oh my God, what I then came to understand, and what so many of us are now awakening to around all this.
And I think that that's perhaps one of the keys. I was brought up on a farm in the middle of nowhere here in the UK, and the very fact that you have, in a way, the isolation is what gives you the time to learn that you like your own company, sometimes better than the company of anything or anybody else. And you like to be able to wrap your mind around things that most people don't even notice are happening, because you've actually got that time to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a huge component to it as well. But I think you all as listeners, I think you're getting a sense of who Sitara and I are individually, who we are together, who are going to be across some really good podcast episodes. And as you can hear, we do chuckle and giggle quite a bit, and we throw a few F-bombs when needed. And other than all that, Sitara, if you will close up this first Virgin episode at this winter equinox, or winter solstice, if you will, just kind of bring us home, and then we'll look forward to the next time together.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, the reason we were kind of given this date has been quite multifaceted for the solstice, in a way quite human, because it is the old celebration of the balance of light and dark. In the northern hemisphere, it is our darkest day of the year. In the southern hemisphere, it's our lightest day of the year, so midwinter and midsummer respectively. So I find that very interesting, that that's when this was kind of planned out for us, and it's been planned out a few months for us, so that's been more than interesting. What I also like about it is I've got a real thing with the number 3, and obviously 21st of the 12th, the 2 3s. Yeah, And I look at the number 3 as the divine balance, and I look at that as the balance between what we perceive here as masculine, feminine, and also the God spark. So we're looking at those 3 perfect energies in perfect balance. So that is one of the reasons we were asked to step forward today in a day that's deemed to be of balance. So having said that, enjoy the rest of your holidays wherever in the world you are and however you decide to celebrate or not. And much love to you all. And we will speak to you in a few weeks' time. Thank you for joining us. Bye.